So yesterday we completed chapter 19, 11:19, which means this morning we're going to begin chapter 20. And I think we'll read a couple of texts, starting with text number 1 from chapter 20. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Shri Uddhava Uvacha. Vidhischa Pratishedhascha. Nigamo Hishvarasyate. Avekshate Ravindaksha. Gunam dosham cha karmanam. Translation: Sri Uddhava said, "My dear lotus-eyed Krishna, you are the Supreme Lord, and thus the Vedic literatures consisting of positive and negative injunctions constitute your order. Such literatures focus upon the good and bad qualities of work." Purport. At the end of the previous chapter, Lord Krishna stated, Guna dosha drishir, dosha puna, dosha guna, tubhya, dubhaya, varjitaha. Focusing on material piety and sin is itself a discrepancy, since actual piety means to transcend both of them. Unquote. Sri Uddhava now pursues this point so that Lord Krishna will give a more elaborate explanation of this difficult subject matter. Sri Uddhava here states that the Vedic literatures, which constitute the laws of God, deal with piety and sin, semicolon. Therefore, it must be clarified how one transcends activities recommended in the Vedas. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, Uddhava suddenly understood Lord Krishna's purpose in the words he had just spoken, and to induce the Lord to elaborate upon this interesting point, Uddhava outwardly challenged the Lord's statement. Text 2, translation. Uddhava continues. According to Vedic literature, the superior and inferior varieties found in the human social system, varnashram, are due to pious and simple modes of family planning. Thus, piety and sin are constant points of reference in the Vedic analysis of the components of a given situation, namely, the material ingredients, place, age, and time. Indeed, the Vedas reveal the existence of material heaven and hell, which are certainly based on piety and sin. Purport. Pratiloma. Pratiloma. There's anuloma and there's pratiloma. Pratiloma in the word for word. Birth in a mixed family wherein the father is inferior in social status to the mother. Pratiloma indicates the combination of a superior woman with an inferior man. For example, in the Vaidehaka community, consist of those born of a Shudra father and a Brahmana mother, whereas the Suttas are those born of a Kshatriya father and a Brahmana mother, or from a Shudra father and a Kshatriya mother. Anuloma indicates those born from a superior father and inferior mother. The Murdhavasikta are those born of a Brahmana father and a Kshatriya mother. Abhashtas are those born from a Brahmana father and a Vaishya mother, and they often become medical men. Karana indicate those born of a Vaishya father and a Shudra mother, or a Kshatriya father and a Vaishya mother. Such mixing of castes is not very much appreciated in Vedic culture, is demonstrated in the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna was very worried that the death of so many Kshatriyas on the battlefield would lead to a mixing of superior women with inferior men, and on those grounds he objected to fighting. In any case, the entire Vedic social system is based on distinguishing between piety and sin, and Sri Uddhava is encouraging the Lord to explain more elaborately his statement that one should transcend both piety and sin. Interesting. Text number 3, Uddhava continues. Without seeing the difference between piety and sin, how can one understand your own instructions in the form of Vedic literatures, which order one to act piously and forbid one to act sinfully? Furthermore, without such authorized Vedic literatures, which ultimately award liberation, how can human beings achieve the perfection of life? Sounds like good arguments, right? Watch what Krishna does. Purport. If one does not accept the necessity of performing pious activities and avoiding sinful activities, it becomes very difficult to understand authorized religious scriptures, and without such scriptures, how can human beings attain salvation? This is the essence of Uddhava's question. Text 4. My dear Lord, in order to understand those things beyond direct experience, such as spiritual liberation or attainment of heaven and other material enjoyments beyond our present capacity, and in general to understand the means and end of all things, the forefathers, demigods, and human beings must consult Vedic literatures, which are your own laws, for these constitute the highest evidence and revelation. Purport. One might argue that while human beings are certainly prone to ignorance, the elevated forefathers and demigods are considered to be all-knowing within universal affairs. If such superior beings would communicate with the earth, then everyone would bypass Vedic knowledge in achieving his personal desire. This concept is denied here by the words Vedash Chakshushuhu. Even the demigods and the forefathers have, at best, an ambitious conception of supreme liberation, and even in material affairs, they, that's these demigods and other elevated forefathers, and even in material affairs, they are subject to personal frustration. Although the demigods are all-powerful in awarding material benedictions to inferior species, such as human beings, they are sometimes thwarted in their personal programs of sense gratification. A rich businessman, for example, may have no difficulty paying the insignificant salary to one of his innumerable workers, but the same wealthy man may be completely frustrated in his dealings with his own family and friends, and may also be defeated in his attempts to expand his fortune by further investments. Although a rich man appears to be all-powerful to his subordinate workers, he must personally struggle to fulfill his personal desires. Similarly, the demigods and forefathers encounter many difficulties in maintaining and expanding their celestial standard of living. they, again, that's demigods and forefathers, must therefore constantly take shelter of superior Vedic knowledge. Even in the administration of cosmic affairs, they strictly follow the guidelines of the Vedas, which are the laws of God. If such fabulous entities as demigods must take shelter of the Vedas, we can just imagine the position of human beings who are frustrated at virtually every step in their lives. Every human being should accept Vedic knowledge as the highest evidence in material and spiritual affairs. Uddhava points out to the Lord that if one accepts the authority of Vedic knowledge, it is seemingly impossible to reject the concept of piety and sin. Thus, Uddhava persists in examining the Lord's controversial statement at the end of the last chapter. One more. Text 5. My dear Lord, the distinction observed between piety and sin comes from your own Vedic knowledge and does not arise by itself. If the same Vedic literature subsequently nullifies such distinction between piety and sin, there will certainly be confusion. And the final purport before Krishna gives an answer. In the Bhagavad Gita, 15:15, Lord Krishna states, Vedayishtasaya vairahameva Vedyaha. By all the Vedas I am to be known. Indeed, I am the compiler of the Vedanta, and I know the Vedas as it is. Vedic knowledge emanates from the breathing of the personality of Godhead. Therefore, whatever Lord Krishna speaks is Veda, or perfect knowledge. The Vedic literatures are full of descriptions of piety and sin, but Lord Krishna's statement that one should transcend piety and sin is also to be understood as Vedic knowledge. Sri Uddhava has understood this point and therefore requests Lord Krishna to clear up an apparent contradiction. Ultimately, the material world gives the living entities a chance to satisfy their perverted desires and at the same time gradually achieve the liberation of going back home, back to Godhead. Thus, material piety must be considered a means and never an absolute end, since the material world itself is not absolute, being temporary and limited. The personality of Godhead is himself the reservoir of all virtue and goodness. Those persons and activities that please the Lord are to be considered virtuous, and those that displease him are to be considered sinful. There cannot be any other permanent definition of these terms if one becomes a mundane moralist, forgetting the Supreme Lord. One's position is certainly imperfect, and one will not achieve the ultimate goal of piety, going back home, back to God. On the other hand, there is great fear among moralists that if the distinction between piety and sin is minimized, people will commit many atrocities in the name of God. In the modern world, there's no clear understanding of spiritual authority, and moral men consider any appeal to transcend morality to be an invitation to fanaticism, anarchy, violence, and corruption. Thus, they regard material moral principles as more important than directly trying to please God. Because of this point is controversial, Uddhava anxiously is requesting the Lord to give a clear explanation. Oh, it was already discussed. So the question he's asking, in one sense, has already been answered because it was already discussed. But he's asking again because of the final statement made. But prior to the final statement, the answer is already given, because the answer explicitly, Krishna said going back a few number of verses from the previous chapter. I've already explained devotional service. Because you're very dear to me, I'll explain it again. And he explains it again. And we heard, for example, the distinction between Krita Punya Punja. You're familiar with that phrase? No? We discussed it in relation to the Cowherd Boys. Krita Punya Punja? No, bell is ringing. In Canto 10, Chapter 12, the first half of Chapter 12 is Shukadeva Goswami describing the activities of the boys, Cowherd Boys, and Krishna. And the age, specifically, the age is 4 years, 4 months. Specifically. So think of a little boy, 4 years, 4 months, playful. And their playfulness is with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He doesn't change his position. He just he conceals his divinity, and he's just playing with the Cowherd Boys, and they're just playing with him. And Shukadeva Goswami goes on and on and on and describing they do this, they do that, they do the other thing, and on and on and on. And playful. 4-year-old, 4 years, 4 months, boys in the forest, no adult supervision, just playing and 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 playing. And then he makes this statement, wow, how fortunate are these Cowherd Boys. And to have this fortune of playing with the supreme source of everything, the personality of Godhead, just playing and playing and playing. How fortunate are they? And to achieve that special fortune, then comes the phrase, Krita Punya Punja. So we discussed this. So Krita means to do something. Krita. Punya means there's different levels of piety. The standard level of piety that people think of is dharma. You do dharma, that's piety, and then there's fruits of piety. And the fruits of dharma, that's piety, is, according to Queen Kunti, these 4 things: high birth, material opulence, wealth, Janma Aishwarya Shruta, high learning, highly learned person, is highly learned as a result of their past piety or performance of Dharma. And beauty, those 4, or combination. And any one of those or combination, those are, according to Kunti and according to the Vedic texts, those are fruits of piety. But those 4 have nothing to do with the Cowherd Boys, because their piety is something else. We heard this. Jiva Goswami explained that their piety is a transcendental piety, meaning birth after birth after birth after birth, exclusively focused on pleasing the personality of Godhead, because that's the essence of bhakti. That's the essence of bhakti, pleasing the personality of Godhead. And that's a transcendental punya. So Krita Punya, Punja means many, or heaps and piles. Who can say endless amount of focus on pleasing the personality of Godhead? That's their qualification, not the material piety or material dharma. So now we have 2 levels, punya and punya, transcendental punya. So what the essence of the Vedas on the one hand, is speaking of piety and sin. The vidhis and nishetas, the do's and the do nots. Do this and don't do that. And one who does this, it leads to elevation. And that elevation, for most people, the elevation means an upgrade. You go first class instead of coach. Upgrade. Little perk. So heavenly planets. The further of these four things, Janma, Aishwarya, Shruta, and Shri, four of those four things. For more, and then more and more and more and more and more and more, and keep going up and up. So the gradations of planets within the universe, more and more and more and more and more. The fruits of piety, and then avoiding the sin. So the Vedas are filled with, and that's what Uddhava is pointing out. The Vedas are filled with, and the Vedas, they're from you. They're your teachings. They're your utterances. And now you're saying transcend them. Don't concern yourself. That's a contradiction. And 5 verses of this is that, this and that, and the other. Contradiction. Apparent contradiction. But the conclusion that Krishna is going to speak is same as 1866 Bhagavad Gita. Sarva dharmam parityaja mamekam sharanam. This one. Then the piety becomes transcendental piety. And the knowledge becomes transcendental knowledge. And the opulence becomes transcendental opulence. And there is such a thing. There's worldly opulence. There's transcendental opulence. There's worldly knowledge. There's transcendental knowledge. And they're not the same. And it's not like you can pile up material knowledge, and you can touch spiritual knowledge. It's not achieved that way. Or piety, and you attain the spiritual world. Just piles of piety. No. They're different. And therefore, the teaching that he presented at the conclusion of chapter 19, that Uddhava was asking about very wisely, one more time, it's as if Uddhava doesn't understand when in fact he understands. That is to say, devotees sometimes are put into a situation by the arrangements of the Supreme Lord, by Super Soul, to speak something that they already know, as if they don't know. We discussed this. But, Kunti speaking as if she's a worldly person, one of the verses. As if she's not attached to Krishna, she wants to become attached to Krishna. She's speaking like that for our edification. But she's certainly attached to Krishna. She's attached to her sons who are attached to Krishna because they're attached to Krishna. Not just the motherly attachment, but the transcendental attachment. And she has it. She's speaking as if she's not. So Uddhava here is also speaking as if he doesn't get it. But he gets it, because he's pure devotee. But it's as if he doesn't get it, or Krishna is inducing him to speak this way so that he can clarify for our edification. Same as Bhagavad Gita, for our edification. Arjuna's taking the position by the influence of Krishna's spiritual potency to be bewildered and materially attached and thus bewildered. And then when his material attachment is removed and spiritual attachment is restored, he's ready. Krishe vachanam tava. I'm ready to do whatever you say. And that's a transcendental attachment. So material attachment, discouraged. Spiritual attachment, encouraged. And then what's the difference between the two? It's like the difference between night and day. That much difference. Forgetfulness of Krishna and remembrance of Krishna. Very simple. smartavya satatam vishnor, vismartavya najatu chit, sarva vidhi niseda shur etayoreva kinkara. All vidhis have as their master this one principle. Always remember Krishna, never forget Krishna. Supposing someone doesn't understand that. And so the Vedas are there so they can at least be pious and avoid sin. And so abundant piety versus sin is found. 90% karma kanda. Do this, that, and the other thing so that you can move towards further piety and lift your situation to more opulent, better birth, better this and that, and the other thing, the upgrade. Vedas. So it's a juxtaposition of what the Vedas say and what Krishna just said, but the same as, sarvadharmam parityaja. Really? Abandon dharma? Really? But it's not just abandon dharma. It's secondary to the primary. The primary is mamekam sharanam. So that's the message. Same. One more example. Simple example. Vyasadev's despondency. He compiled the Vedas, which is the breathing of Narayana, and he did a perfect job. No mistake. Perfect. And he's feeling despondent. Because, according to Narada, you have not sufficiently, it's there in the Vedas. Krishna is there in the Vedas. And the purpose of the Vedas is there in the Vedas. But many people don't get it. And Vyasadeva was feeling despondent. For what reason? He hadn't sufficiently glorified, and therefore Srimad Bhagavatam, and therefore this little section. Where Uddhava, perfectly learned person, is asking as if he's not perfectly learned person. Like you're recommending sarvadharmam parityaja, but the dharma that's in the Vedas is from you. So why are you saying that? As if he didn't understand. So that clarification can be there. We mentioned this several classes ago, saying it again and again. The Bhagavad Gita is like undergraduate and the Bhagavatam is graduate study. The same principles that are there in undergraduate study are there in graduate study. They don't change. Principles don't change. They're just further elaboration on and further detail about. And then the application can be refined in case one didn't understand it. Or even if one did understand it, then further refinement of clarity of understanding. So that's what's going on here. The graduate study of Bhagavad Gita, 1866, the conclusion of Bhagavad Gita. It's now front and center, the focus of Uddhava Gita, at least this little section. The title of chapter 20, that's at the top of every page of chapter 20, is Pure Devotional Service. And the statement at the beginning of the chapter, Pure Devotional Service surpasses knowledge and detachment. So knowledge, one of the ways of understanding what knowledge is from his questions, is to know what's what. Discerning this is to be done, that's not to be done. This is in the category of matter. And there's elevated states of matter, and go for the elevated states of matter. Act piously. So knowledge and then detachment. The perfection of knowledge and detachment is devotional service. And in that realm of devotional service, there's mixed and then there's unmixed devotional service. So Krishna, is inducing Uddhava to ask questions so he can elaborate further on unmixed, Shuddha Sattva. In the previous chapter, specific mention was made that mode of goodness assists. Mode of goodness is mixed with ignorance and passion, but mode of goodness assists devotional service. Mode of goodness assists devotional service. Better to be in the mode of goodness than ignorance and passion to nourish your bhakti. But that's not complete, and therefore surpass this distinction of piety and sin. So then his question, and then the whole chapter is Shuddha Sattva, bhakti, unmixed as opposed to mixed. It's nice. When Srila Prabhupada spoke on Bhagavad Gita, he knew what Krishna meant. So he didn't have to necessarily, in many cases he did cite verses from the Bhagavatam, but whether he cited verses from the Bhagavatam or not, he gave the unmixed. And then in Bhagavatam classes, he would give the unmixed, because that's what Bhagavatam does. And in the stage of unmixed devotional service, is it important to know what is piety and what is sin, and to avoid sin and to engage in piety? It's certainly important. Just like, say, charity as opposed to theft. So charity is recommended, and theft is not recommended. What do you do with wealth? You don't do that, and you do this. You don't steal the property of someone else, and whatever the property that may come to your hand, it's Krishna's property, and you utilize it in Krishna's service, including and what Krishna does. He maintains all living entities, and your capacity, the maintenance factor is there. In inappropriate ways. Then water the root of the tree. There's many impoverished people. So how to be charitable? You worship the personality of Godhead with your wealth, and then all the twigs and leaves and branches, etc., receive benefit. But it doesn't mean that you ignore people that are poor. There's a very nice example in Chasing Rhinos with the Swami. Prabhupada has taken the devotees to Magh Mela. Not Kumbh Mela, but Magh Mela. And he was prepared. There was a bag that had little aluminum coins. At some point in time, India had aluminum coins instead of metal coins. So there was a bag, and he asked his servant to get the bag from his suitcase, and they took the bag and gave each of the devotees some aluminum coins. And because by the side of the river where the Mela was going on, there were poor people, sadhus or imposters, or mix, and given charity rather than just ignore them. So rather than take the time and trouble to discern this is a genuine sadhu and this is an imposter, just wants some money, and so he acts as if he's a sadhu, he's given charity. Not the main wealth that Prabhupada and he instructed and engaged his disciples was printing books and establishing temples and worshiping deities and distributing prasadam and the transcendental aspects. But the other ones, they're not zeros. They're not tens either. So one should be observant of those lesser, while the primary is primary, because that's also that's pleasing to Krishna. Those persons who are sadhus, who have become by design, by choice, they become impoverished. Bhaktisiddhanta did something similar in his yatras in Vrindavan. The story goes that he would take devotees, disciples, often they were wealthy people, to Vrindavan during Kartik month and go to this place, that place. And he noticed and remarked that the wealthy people, they weren't making donations to the paupers that would line going around Radhakund, etc. So, he chastised them. You have an asset that belongs to Krishna. These are Vaishnavas. So not like everything, you sacrifice everything, but something. Krishna has endowed you, it's his wealth. He's endowed you with something, you distribute it charitably. It's not like major, but it's a point. To go back to the main topic, and I'm going to end abruptly. The main point is the sub factors of dharma are not to be trashed, but they take a secondary position. And particularly the application of those secondary dharmas are definitely not to be neglected when it comes to transcendental life. Here's another example, feeding the poor. There was a big deal because Prabhupada repeated it. There are persons who are wealthy and they have an interest in feeding the poor, and part of the interest in feeding the poor is karma kanda. You feed the poor, you get some piety points, and you become more wealthy. Very calculated. Because from piety, from performance of dharma, you get fruits of dharma. You get piety. You become more wealthy. Knowing that, people would give piety, give charity, and feed the poor, and make a big thing of it. And then, and raise funds to get people to give money to feed the poor, because lots of poor people, starving people, etc. And it can stay on the material platform, or distribution of prasadam is beneficial to living entities that receive the prasadam. Now, because it's beneficial to living entities to receive prasadam, one can do that as a business also. Let me maintain myself by raising money to feed prasadam to the poor, and that's a nice business. It's the purpose behind our activity is important. The consciousness and purpose behind our activity is important. And so that's Bhagavatam teaches us all those things. And we're not going to continue tomorrow because there's another topic for tomorrow morning at the temple. But you might be interested to read what Krishna's reply is. But at least now we know the direction of Krishna's reply. Let's see if there's some discussion.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hi, Krishna. I can hear you.
So, just by learning Gita or Bhagavatam and with ignorance, can the person get transcendental piety?
If somebody is ignorant and reads the Bhagavatam, can they reach transcendence? That's your question. Gradually. because ignorance, what's the essence of ignorance is ignoring Krishna. Little baby ignorances come from mama, and the mama is ignoring Krishna. So if ignoring Krishna is reversed, that is, attention goes to Krishna, then ignorance is removed, because darkness comes from turning one's attention away from Krishna. It's a very simple example. I like Prabhupada's simple. You're looking at the sun, you see light. You turn your back to the sun, you see shadow. So if one is in ignorance, it's because one's back is to the sun, but you turn your attention to the sun. The ignorance, darkness is dissipated. Now you're looking at the sun. Similarly, back to your question, by reading of Srimad Bhagavatam, the essence is forgetfulness of Krishna is changed to remembrance of Krishna. And remembrance of Krishna is the foundation of returning to the spiritual world. So any class of people who in this material world doesn't fall into the category of ignorance. It's a place of ignorance.
So how does that person achieve the transcendence?
How does that person reach transcendence? Well, there's the sound vibration, and there's the guidance of those that have assimilated that sound vibration. Teachers and teachings. That's how it works. But you go to school. You get educated when you go to school. But a transcendental school is removal of forgetfulness of Krishna. So that it works because the sound of the Bhagavatam is non different than Krishna. The Bhagavatam is not different than Krishna. The sound vibration. That's how it works. Just by exposure to the sound. You turn on the light and darkness is dispelled. And it's very, very natural. One doesn't have to be a scholar. You don't have to be a Sanskrit scholar or super person. Just the sound. In the womb of Kayadu, Maharishi Parikshit heard the teachings from Narada, and he became a pure devotee, just while in the womb of his mother. He didn't go to school. He wasn't, didn't have the cerebral capacity, but by sound vibration, he became purified. That sound works spiritual sound works like that. Now, it can be swifter or slower. Very, very, very gradual, or it can be very quick. And what makes the difference between gradual and quick? A lot has to do with the attentiveness, the oral reception of that sound. So there's qualitative hearing, and there's qualitative elevation, and thus more swift or more slow elevation or purification. But the principle doesn't change. And then when one understands the principle, at least the door is open for more attentive hearing. Like the classic example. When Shukadeva Goswami was speaking the Bhagavatam to Maharishi Parikshit, he knew 7 days the bell's going to ring. He was really attentive. I mean, he was a great soul, but super attentive because his life was at stake. His destination after this life was at stake. So for us too. So there's degrees of attentiveness. Maharishi Parikshit achieved perfection in 7 days. For us, it may take a little while. Same hearing, same message. Attentiveness. Something else? Yes.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. My question was related to 11.20.2 where they're 20.2.
20.2.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where they're talking about the mixing of the, where they give the definitions about superior and inferior varieties found in the human social system, and then the combinations that they talk about, superior women and inferior men, and the words that they use. What is the significance of that, Maharaj? I mean,
Of what?
so when they say that, this
Are
is
you
this
looking at the verse or purport?
at the purport, when they say pratiloma indicates the combination of
Okay, okay.
So maybe first I want to understand what is the significance, and in today's time, is it still important?
Material principle is still important. It's not decisive. It has an impact, but it can be transcended by transcendental method. And the transcendental method is Shuddha Bhakti. Bhakti that's coming from a source that's Shuddha. And then it doesn't mean anything. Doesn't have any impact at all. Zero. But it has to be Shuddha Bhakti, or Bhakti that's even mixed Bhakti. Then it becomes minimized. So, what's the purpose of it? It has everything to do with the topic that we've been discussing this morning. That is, Dharma has to do with elevation, piety, and then there's piety and there's impiety. There's degrees of impiety. So pious is this, less than perfectly pious is degrees of going downward. And does it have its place? Its place is for elevation to the plane of goodness, so that from the plane of goodness one can more readily approach transcendence. The very simple example, very simple, taking wet leaves and making them dry leaves. Dry leaves will more easily ignite. Wet leaves takes a lot longer to ignite. So the Vedas give us means to make things dry so they can ignite with a spark. That's its place. So for us, it's not being followed. Some places, somewhere, maybe it's being followed, but largely speaking, it's not being followed. It's Kali Yuga. Things are all jumbled up. So what to do about the jumbled up age? You need a big fire, not just a spark. Bhava Maha Davagni Nirvapanam. Something else? Yeah.
There is a question online,
Really?
Maharaj. Yeah. Manani Radha Mataji is asking, thank you, Guru Maharaj. What's the relationship between consciousness and practice? Once Prabhupada said, first you pay obeisance, then the feelings of surrender will come.
This just sounds like, well, what's the relationship between, what are the two options? Consciousness
and practice.
And practice. So much has to do with the person from whom one is hearing about practice, the teacher, and the teaching. So the consciousness of submission precedes the action of submission. No, the indication that the example that she's giving is you pay obeisances, and the desire to submit oneself to the person whom one is offering obeisances to is nourished. But it's not exactly cause effect. Not exactly cause and effect. Supposing, here's a for example. Supposing somebody's a newcomer, and the newcomer is attending a class or something, and everybody offers obeisances, and they offer their obeisances. Because they offer their obeisances, it doesn't mean their heart is now oriented, consciousness is now oriented towards submission. You can say it the other way around. Supposing someone is of the consciousness of submission, they're going to offer obeisances when, in this circumstance, that circumstance. So the relationship between consciousness and
Practice.
practice. Another statement that Prabhupada made is, when you do something again and again and again, that's practice. That practice then becomes second nature. It's like riding a bicycle. When you first start to ride a bicycle, it's very awkward. But after practice and practice and practice, then you don't have to think about it. Just zoom, 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 off you go riding the bicycle. There's still potential, falling off the bicycle or something. So it's not, hazard is gone, but by practice it becomes second nature. Or driving a car, or though there's motor skills, but back to things that are on the more subtle level than motor skills, by practice and practice it becomes second nature. Now, is it possible? The answer to this question is yes. Is it possible one can practice and practice, but it's cosmetic? It's just, it's completely external, and it hasn't significantly impacted consciousness. So your question is practice and consciousness. It's not that the behavior may become part of your life, but it's not necessarily the consciousness is the consciousness of submission by paying obeisances or something else. Like chanting. One can make the mouth go, but the attention can be somewhere else altogether for a long, long stretch of time. So the behavior doesn't mean consciousness. However, on a transcendental platform, that chanting, even Abbas chanting, adds up. It's never lost. And if one continues, even in Abbas chanting, it's not that automatically enough Abbas chanting and then becomes Shuddha, but the covering becomes cleansed enough that when one hears about Shuddha Nam, one feels inspired more so than before by abundant Abbas chanting. The potential is the same as the dry leaves versus wet leaves. It's more likely that the dry leaves can be ignited than the wet leaves. So I may not put the leaves in a fire, I may put the leaves near a fire. And gradually the wet leaves become dry leaves that become more easily to ignite. So like that. Practice may bring one closer to the point of surrender or transcendence, but it's not automatically transcendence. Something else?
There's one more online.
One more.
Yes. Amara Mataji asks, Hare
Same?
Krishna. No, Amara Mataji.
Amara, okay.
She asks, Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj, does imposters' misuse of any given charity brings sinful reactions to the giver of charity?
No. how somebody receives charity, that's their responsibility. Now, if one is a discriminating individual, one may choose, let me give charity here and not give charity there, because the person that's the imposter, recipient of charity, it's not, the same benefit will not go to them as to the person who is the proper recipient. So one may discern. We do discern. You know, the example of the Kumbh Mela, or Magh Mela, it was Magh Mela. At Magh Mela, giving in charity to the sadhus, and some are imposters and some are genuine, it's not suitable for that circumstance to make those discriminations. But in everyday life, we do make distinctions between persons who are worthy recipients and others. But that's our responsibility. And then, you know, the back to the question, if one gives to an unsuitable person, is there some consequence that goes to the charity giver? No. Anything else? Srila Prabhupada Ki. You want something? Okay, here comes the microphone. Wait a minute, here comes the microphone. Wait a minute.
Your grace is surrender feet, Father. Kararavindena padaravinnam mukaravinde vineshayantam vatasya patrasya kutesayanam balam mukundam manasa smarami. Hare Krishna Maharaj. My mistakes, every roots, false apologies. Many sorry. Janma aparadham.
I can't follow what she's saying.
మహారాజ్ నా ప్రభు చనిపోయిన దుఃఖించలేదు, వారి ఆయుష్తో చేరలేక నిలిచి ఉన్నాను. ఈ లోకాన్ని నిలవలేక మైండ్ ఆఫ్ సెల్ఫ్ బాడీ ప్రజెంట్తో టైం ఇస్తూ ఇంటితనంగా గడుపుతున్నాను. కృష్ణ గోలోక్ టైం రాకుండా గురుగారు.
Her husband passed away recently, Maharaj.
Yeah.
తర్వాత మీ హస్బెండ్ చనిపోయిన తర్వాత చెప్పారు. తర్వాత చెప్పండి మాతాజీ. మీ హస్బెండ్ చనిపోయిన తర్వాత
మైండ్ ఆఫ్ సెల్ఫ్ బాడీ ప్రజెంట్తో టైం ఇస్తూ ఇంటితనంగా గడుపుతున్నాను.
మీ
So
హస్బెండ్
she wants to know what?
మీ క్వశ్చన్ ఏంటి, మీ ప్రశ్న ఏంటి?
Wait. Not two people, one person.
కృష్ణ గోలోకం
గురుమారాజు అపరాధంతో సేవాశక్తి కృష్ణునికి సంతృప్తిమాసనకున్నాను. కేవలం ఆహారం స్వీకరించుకో జీవనం చేస్తారు. భక్తి శివగణకు చేయకూడదంటారు, ఆత్మ అపరాధం గోరకర్మం అంటారు. గోరకం చేయలేదు.
she's asking how to reach Goloka. She's saying she's living with absent body.
Living with what?
She's living with absent mind,
She's living with an absent mind.
but there are so many offenses she's making while doing services. She's exhibiting her humility basically, but she's asking, there's so many offenses, how do I go to Goloka? So that's basic purport of what I understand from what she told me.
Say it again slower. I'm making offenses. Does that make me ineligible to go to Goloka?
How do I go to Goloka?
How?
Offenses are there. She's aware of the offenses.
She's aware of her
Yes,
offenses.
yes. But she's asking, how do I still go to Goloka?
Well, the answer is simple. You know, it's up to Krishna. And when Krishna gives his mercy, one may be less than perfect, or sinful, or offensive. And if Krishna wants, Krishna can take someone who's an unqualified person to the spiritual world. However, she or someone aspiring to go to the spiritual world, then there's direction and there's impetus. I want to be with Krishna. That's the impetus part. And then there's the path. I'm less than perfect. So, my dear Lord Krishna, please be merciful upon me and help me become qualified so I can come to you. And that kind of attention to Krishna, the goal, to be with Krishna, goal, then the covering or the impurity, the contamination, the consequences of those things, Krishna can address. Now, there's something that I do on my side, there's something that Krishna does on his side. From my side, I aspire, and the things that I understand, particularly sin is one thing, offense is another thing. Things that are offensive, then clean it up, because it's not pleasing to Krishna. That's what the offense is, the essence of the offense is, acting contrary to what's pleasing to Krishna. So there's something that I do on my side and something that Krishna does on his side. And stay the course. But both things, what I do on my side and what Krishna does on his side. And we appeal to Krishna. We don't just place the burden on Krishna to pick me up from a dirty condition. We appeal to him to pick us up. And we act in such a way that's the straight line. Even we're not in that stage yet. We strive for that kind of lifestyle, expecting all the while Krishna will be very kind. Rupa Goswami has verses like this. The Asha Bandha. You can refer her to that section of Rupa Goswami's writings. Mm-hmm. Prabhupada discusses it in Nectar Devotion. Hope against hope. Mm-hmm. I'm not qualified, but Krishna, you're merciful. Please pick me up. But it doesn't mean, we continue doing things that aren't pleasing to Krishna. I think I'm going to end. Srila Prabhupada.
Jai.
Jai.